I'm Leonard Nimoy. Join me for In Search of
An Argument.
Welcome to In Search of an Argument. Today we are going to argue about why I am fat. This discussion is going to be led by the great Shelley Cummings, and I'm sure that John, Peggy, and Beth have their own thoughts on why Jim is fat.
My kids like the word plump.
Yes.
There's portly.
Portly, obese.
Vertically challenged.
Anyway, welcome to the show. We're recording this night of August 4th, 2025.
Hello.
And we're going to turn it over to our great friend, Shelley Cummings.
Okay. Well, this will be a fun evening of discussion and judging, probably, about genetics and otherwise. This topic, if I recall correctly, came about when Jim stumbled upon something on a Genome Web article. I think it was
the New York
Jim?
Times, right?
New York Times.
Yeah, I was in the middle of eating an entire bag of Cool Ranch Doritos, and I was reading the New York Times, and there was this article that explains why I'm fat. So I thought that would be a worthy topic of discussion.
So this article was a big picture overview of a very large study that was published in the journal Nature Medicine. And Nature is a really big, well-respected journal that has a lot of different offshoots, Nature Medicine and a variety of other different topics. And this particular paper, maybe I should read the paper title to give it justice. Polygenic Prediction of Body Mass Index and Obesity Through the Life Course and Across Ancestries. So in order to make this interactive, I would like to go around the horn here and tell me what you think all of those words mean collectively.
Go through each word again. Give me the words.
Polygenic Prediction of Body Mass Index and Obesity Through the Life Course and Across Ancestries.
The only word that jumps out at me is weird is life course. It's like through life. Why couldn't they say a lifetime, right? But it seems like a new word. But everything else is, polygenic.
They're not English teachers, John. They're scientists.
Yeah, that's true.
But that's another story.
But they're trying to be more inventive with their language.
And polygenic, you think, is multiple genes.
Yep.
Is that what you said,
That's
John?
what I said.
Okay. Yeah. How about you, Beth?
When Jim first sent the article, my takeaway was, if my ancestors are fat, I'm going to be fat too. But I didn't really know what the only when Jim was like, Shelley, isn't this what you do? You know about genes and these types of things. But I glossed over the whatever word.
Okay.
I understand the basic question that they're investigating is to how much does genetic makeup predict the likelihood of someone being obese or having significant excess weight or whatever the right description of that is. Okay.
And Peggy, do you have thoughts?
So all we're doing is saying what we think polygenic means, right? We're not talking about the article.
The title, just
the whole title. What do you think?
Polygenic Prediction of Body Mass Index and Obesity Through the Life Course and Across Ancestries.
Oh, okay.
Just based on the title, what do you think it would be about?
Yeah, I guess I would agree that I think it's your BMI has to do with multiple genes, not just one gene throughout your life.
I have a question.
Okay.
Wait, it's the polygenic prediction. I'm sorry, I'm making you repeat the title 4 times because that wasn't the New York Times title. Polygenic prediction
of body mass index and obesity.
Because polygenic prediction suggests to me that they're going to predict the genes, the multiple genes you have. The way it's another poorly written sentence, Jim. But I'm just taking it apart.
I disagree.
It clearly modifies the word.
They are. It is more, think of it more as a question that they are investigating.
Does it have a question mark at the end of it?
Well, but that's the way scientific papers are written.
That's the way papers are. Yeah, the titles.
Which is to say, they are saying the hypothesis is that if you have this combination of genes, you could use that to predict successfully what people would have in terms of individual people, but also in terms of inherited further generations, what their likely body mass index in, i.e. how fat they would be.
Okay, so that's good. So we're going to go on so we don't get too stuck on that right now. So
why did you ask that?
I think I get an A in that part of the class, by the way.
Because polygenic, when you said multiple genes, so just by saying polygenic, yeah, I could see how you would get there. This context, what we're talking about are single nucleotide polymorphisms, or SNPs. Okay. So these are subtle genetic changes that everybody has. You have a constellation of them, and they're very low level of risk. They don't cause anything, that just makes you subtly different from each other. However, if you have a certain collection of those SNPs and we put it together into a polygenic risk score, or in this paper they call it a PGS. Many papers will call it a PRS, polygenic risk score. They're looking at SNPs, not a gene, like a gene that causes Huntington disease or a gene that causes breast cancer, like BRCA1. So what I think you might have meant, I'm putting words in your mouth, is multiple of those genes, not the subtle constellation of single nucleotide polymorphisms.
I definitely had it wrong.
So that's why So that's why I wanted to kind of stop it before it went too far down.
When you say SNPs, you mean SNPs of a gene? So it's parts of a gene, or is that even that wrong?
They're segments within the gene, within genes all across the human genome. And so genes that are really important, it's not quite the best word to use, can turn on and turn off and give you eye color, hair color, personality, diseases, and so forth. These things are kind of like underlying, but they're still hereditary. You still can pass down a constellation of these SNPs from parent to child. So there is inheritance involved. It's just not like an autosomal dominant gene or a recessive gene that two parents need to have to pass down to the child to have, let's say, cystic fibrosis. Each parent passes down a gene.
Let me ask a question then, because it seems the right time to ask it, Shelley. So my understanding is there are certain things, such as, for example, eye color is probably the most commonly known, where in fact the genetic explanation is relatively simple in terms of what genes you inherit from your parents, right? But for other things, such as, with some exceptions, such as, behavioral things or more complex things, the part that genetics plays has generally, to this point, been found to be much more complicated. It's not, as you said, a single gene determining X or determining your susceptibility to a particular disease or particular behavior or something like that. It is usually I don't know. I'm going to say it in a word that may not be scientifically. It is usually an array of different genetic factors that play into that. And that's why it's much more complicated to, if you have the genetic information about two parents, you can predict somebody's eye color with dramatic accuracy. You cannot do that for most of these other things. It's much more complicated.
Yes, that is the case. There are exceptions to it, and I use Huntington's disease as a good example. You inherit that gene, you will get Huntington's disease in your lifetime, and there are times, decades when it's more likely to occur with some variation. And there are other conditions that are pretty straightforward. But you're absolutely correct. The vast majority of situations in genetics, there's a lot of gray. And the word that you might have been thinking about is called multifactorial. So there's multiple things.
That wasn't a word I was thinking of, but I will start using
I know it
it
was,
all
Jim.
the time.
So there's, we know there's a genetic contribution, but there's other influences. And the other example that I mentioned earlier is like the BRCA1 gene that we know increases the risk for early onset breast and ovarian cancer, for example. But there are families out there that have that gene that don't get early onset breast cancer. They get it later than what we see in other families. Or one sister might have the altered gene and the other sister also has it, but one doesn't get cancer and the other one does. So
And
while it's a straightforward inherited gene and mutation, it doesn't always express itself the same way in every person. And that's
then
kind of,
that
go ahead.
and that further is complicated by the fact that, again, there are exceptions, but there are, in the great majority of cases, there's also environmental factors in addition that could play a role in addition to. So saying that, again, with exceptions, and there are some, but in most cases, it's a combination of genetics and environmental factors, or at least it potentially is a combination of those.
Absolutely, it is. Absolutely.
How does that work?
So if and some of that feeds into this paper, because some of the variables, just to pull in the paper a little bit earlier than I was going to, but that's fine. The that if you have in general, a unhealthy lifestyle, you're sedentary, you don't exercise, you eat fast food or greasy foods all the time, regardless of your genetics, you're going to put on weight. You're going to have cardiovascular disease. You're going to have all kinds of diabetes. You're going to have health problems because of your lifestyle. If you compound that with some genetic variables, whether they're these, SNPs, the right collection of SNPs, or if you have a predisposition to diabetes because of a family history, then those are that multifactorial nature. The other side of that, to Jim's point earlier, is you can be somebody like Winston Churchill, smoke your entire life, drink your entire life, and live into your 90s and never get all the things you would predict somebody who had that lifestyle and that size would get. So that's where it goes back to, there's lots of gray area.
I mean, the converse of what you're saying, though, is also that, for example, if you are predisposed to like something like diabetes or weight gain or whatever, and those two often run together, although not always. If you start, like, if as a child you are raised in a very, a diet that avoids lots of sugar and salt and things like that, a very healthy diet, and that becomes your default diet regimen, you can avoid. You may be able to avoid, or at least minimize, the risk of actually developing those conditions.
And as a child, if you see that your parents eat a certain way or don't exercise a certain way, or do, you take on those habits. So that's in general, those are and sometimes you watch that and you go the other way. So there, that's genetic plays a role in there, but there is a strong environmental and nurturing impact as well.
I just want to point out that Peggy just did the tightrope and contributed to the group chat while we were having our piece. So I'm hoping.
And you got the question we missed, I assume.
Yeah, but I missed two others. I want to know if Shelley keeps talking about Huntington's disease because she's watching Virgin River.
Is it on Virgin
No,
River?
I finished Virgin River. I finished that.
Wait a minute, did the new season that come out yet?
No.
Oh my God, there's going to be another one?
Is there another one?
Season 7, but no, it's not out yet.
By the way, I happened to notice the
change of
like poster or whatever, the ad for Sullivan's Crossing.
Oh yeah, I watched.
And the people look identical to the people on Virgin River, like the two main characters. You look at it really, and you think that's the same people. It's not, but they're very close.
It's the same show, but it's not as good.
Yeah.
So Shelley, I wasn't sure if are we in the conversation mode, or are we still are you setting us up for a conversation?
No, we have to keep going. I'm sorry, I was distracted.
I just wanted to give Peggy some trouble.
I came in hot, and I'm trying to catch up with my daily activities.
I saw.
Now, Peggy, were you late because you were camping and forgot we were doing a podcast?
No camping, no. Nope.
Shame.
You do look sunburned.
Oh, nice. That
You
means
look
I'm
like you have some
red.
sun.
No, I don't have any sun.
So yeah, I was still kind of setting you up, John,
Okay,
because
good.
I wanted you to understand the polygenic part of it, the SNPs, the single nucleotide polymorphisms, are put together in a little package that is what makes the PRS, or the polygenic risk score, and that's a collection of these genetics that they have pulled out from these very large, what are called GWAS studies, genome-wide association studies.
Mhm.
And what they look at huge numbers of populations of people to pull out these genetic markers, so to speak, these SNPs that are
Mhm.
markers
Mhm.
that can be attached to a variety of different conditions. This paper is about obesity, but there's SNP studies being done in mental health disorders, diabetes, cardiovascular disease, colon cancer to stratify all kinds of risk, breast cancer to stratify risk. It's a huge area that's going to explode, because finding those really high risk, high penetrant genes, like I mentioned, BRCA1, for example, those are rare in the population. But polygenic poly PRS SNPs are not. Everybody has them. It's just looking to see if you have the right collection that give you a high risk. Jim, you have a question?
I have a question because on that again, my understanding on that, what you're talking about there is that, obviously there's some awareness in the medical community that, uh, risk factor. So, for example, it's quite common that they will ask about your family history of cancer or something like that because it's recognized. But the idea is to get to the point where you can more zero in by if you can find these genetic SNPs, markers, whatever the right word is, and if somebody has them, you can more particularly say how vulnerable someone might be to a particular cancer or some numbers of cancers or things like that. So the idea is to go just from the sort of crude, what do you have a family history of cancer or something, to a more, let's get your genes tested, and then we can say more particularly what you might have more vulnerability to. Is that more or less on the right idea?
Yes, and that is also what was done in this paper. It was to see if the polygenic risk score was additive to what we know the clinical variables are. So, if you're born a fat baby, are you always going to be a fat baby, or are there SNPs that predict that? Are there other variables, like if the mom was obese? Were there what was her pre-pregnancy BMI? How old was she when she had that birth? Even household social status is a variable that can be taken into account for obesity. So all those clinical variables in terms of obesity, but they do that also look at those variables in mental health. Is there a history of schizophrenia? Is there a history of depression? Because that elevates that person's risk. And then if there's a polygenic risk score that you can add on to that, and that person has that collection of SNPs, then their risk could go up substantially, or it can go down. It works both directions. So it can stratify risk for individuals in a more defined way based on that individual's genomics, not just based on population. Oh, you have a BMI of over 30, so you have class 1 diabetes. These are the 10 things you should do, which is usually lifestyle and diet kind of things. But now they can talk a little bit more specifically to you about genetics. John.
So what's the news here? It sounded like the article in the New York Times was that this was the kind of they're getting going with this. It's not like they've already identified what the SNPs are that you need in order to be. It's like they're just getting going. Like what's the state of the art?
So this was a massive study. 5.1 million people were looked at from all these. This is a meta-analysis from all of the studies. And the upshot of this is that this paper, this data is suggesting that PRS will improve the prediction of who is more likely to be obese and carry that with them at different points in their life. So that's where that title was, through across the lifespan, because they looked from birth to up to 5 years old, and then at age 8, at age 15, young adult, and then up to 50. So they had very long analysis ability to look at this data, which is really hard to come by, to have these databases that have that trajectory of time. And they really showed that the PRS provided a better risk prediction than the standard variables that are used in clinical practice. So state of the art, your question. It's not used in clinical practice regularly. There's still a lot to be worked out, and part of it is across the ancestries, which is part of the title. Those GWAS studies that I mentioned in the beginning, those large genome studies where they pull out and study these SNPs, are largely Northern European whites, contain Northern European white individuals. And SNPs are very dependent on where you come from in the world. This paper looked at 6 different ancestral groups. But even this paper, African American ancestry or African-like, it didn't predict risk as well. And you can see that even in the breast cancer population. And then you can also see protective SNPs. So in breast cancer genetics, for example, there's a protective SNP in Amerindian Indians that make it reduce their risk. Again, risk scores go up or go down in prediction of risk. Yes, Jim.
So the thought is, I think, if I understand it, is that it's the idea being that at some point in the not too distant future, by determining who has these collection of markers or whatever, that you could then at a very early age potentially determine someone's risk for these various things. And then the question becomes, what exactly do you do with that information, and how does that affect? I mean, do you
You
that's
intervene.
a whole nother story.
You intervene early. Yeah.
Well, the question is, but intervention isn't always a good thing. You have to be very careful about that especially when you're intervening with children. But that's a whole separate kettle of fish, which first you have to figure out if you can figure out the situation, and then you have to figure out what's the appropriate intervention. And I assume that, in other words, it's one thing to take an adult at an early age and put them on drugs because they're susceptible to something. It's another thing to take a 4-year-old child and do that. So
right. And I wasn't thinking the drugs necessarily, but some kids should be on drugs. I was thinking more of, you watch their diet more carefully. You watch the sugar intake more carefully at a younger age. But a component of this
we should be doing that for everybody anyway, though, right?
I know,
but that's the point.
If you know,
yeah,
yeah,
that's the point.
You have that added. Go ahead, John.
No, I was just gonna say. If genetics, if we know this about genetics and SNPs, if we know that this is so powerful, then why on earth are we pretending that generic lifestyle advice applies to everyone?
Because it's not the only thing, John. We said that genetics is a factor. It's a predictor, but it's not a 100%.
I get it, but if it's 10%, if 5% affects me and then 99% affects you.
No. The point is,
specialize.
Some people are going to be more susceptible, but I could probably devise a lifestyle that would make somebody who's very unsusceptible fat. And at the same token, I could devise a lifestyle that somebody could follow a lifestyle, and depending on their susceptibility, they may end up being it. It also, there are other factors as well, which the other parts is obesity is an issue, but there are other issues that run congruent with it, but aren't exactly parallel. Like, you don't have to be fat to be a diabetic, and not everybody who's fat has a diabetic problem. Frequently that overlaps, but it's not a 100% overlap. So you may be, for example, potentially more susceptible to diabetes than obesity, but the solution to that may be very similar, which is to avoid a certain kind of diet. But it may not be because you're going to be obese. It may be because you're susceptible to diabetes.
So the other aspect of this study, they recognize that intensive lifestyle interventions require an investment. They require an investment from the person as well as the doctor continuing to hound them and take measurements and everything. And it has, variable success. Intentionally or unintentionally, weight gain happens many times after somebody has lost a considerable amount of weight. They just slip and it comes back. And so what this study wanted to look at is if they evaluated the polygenic risk score associated with weight loss for those people that went on an intensive life intervention during their first year, and then how did that impact their weight gain? Did they gain weight slower? Did they gain weight at all because they knew that they had that? And there are 2 different trials that were mentioned in here. And what they said is that those that had the high polygenic risk score lost more weight the first year, which kind of makes sense because they had more weight to lose. They were a higher risk group compared to controls. And those that they lost about 3% of their baseline weight, which is not a huge amount, but they lost more than the controls. However, that higher polygenic risk score was associated with more weight regain rather than
Makes sense.
keeping it off. So to your point, Jim, you can intervene, but how is it sustainable? Are there other things that need to be evaluated that you can't get at in this study? Yes, Jim.
So now I'm going to speak in my role as the designated fat person on this program. And Shelley, I apologize. I can only phrase this more poetically than scientifically. But the real issue for people who need to lose or should lose weight, whatever the right term is not losing weight, because there's 1,000 ways to lose weight. Like all those crazy diets people predict. Yeah, you can lose weight doing that. The problem is keeping the weight off. That is the magic that eludes solution right now, because for whatever reason, the way it appears is that as you lose weight, your body conspires against you by resetting the thermostat, so to speak, so that, in other words, it's like you're on a treadmill that you have to keep going faster and faster just to stay at the same point. Because as you lose weight, the body keeps resetting the thermostat, so that what you did to lose the weight, you'd have to keep doing that and more to keep all that weight off. And that's the secret code that no one has cracked yet. That is the real drug solution we need to find, is the one that prevents the thermostat from resetting or whatever, so that that makes it,
Well, everybody I know on Ozempic
Jim-
is taking it off, and they just keep it off. They just keep taking Ozempic.
Well, we don't know the long term yet.
How long has it
That's
been?
the thing.
10 years?
We don't really have the long term
No,
studies.
I don't know how long
we
those
think
studies
it'll work,
took place.
but we think it'll work.
But I mean, I know a lot of
So-
people
That's
who were
the idea.
fat who are not fat, and they take Ozempic, and they're just not
Okay.
fat, and they haven't been.
How long
fully-
have they been not
Well, I
fat?
don't know. I mean, at least 8-10 years. I mean, I feel like I've. I
Okay,
remember
well,
I
8
remember
and 10
talking
years
about
is
it,
pretty
but
good.
I don't know.
8 and 10 years is pretty good if that's true, but I don't think Ozempic's
If-
even been around that
Maybe
long.
not.
But
I
if
don't
they're
know, yeah.
still on it,
Right.
still on it,
Right.
then
But
they
you can
haven't.
take it. You can
have the
supposedly
regain.
take it forever.
Yeah,
It's like you don't have to stop Ozempic.
yeah.
But
So
it's-
that's the
Well,
thing.
Jim-
So
Jim-
maybe,
without having this long-term data yet, but yeah, you
yeah, that's the thing. If it works, then that may be the solution.
Jim, when you're talking about that, the way you talk about it, it's like when you say the weight and keep the weight off. I have this idea that you're putting it out there as this static thing. There's like this clump of weight, and it's like it goes here or it goes here
Well,
or it goes here.
okay.
And
Well-
and like no, I'm not being silly to be silly. I'm like, for me, it's like who you are today, who I am today, is not who I was 10 years ago.
Yeah.
is not what it was. You know, so like, and maybe that goes to your thermostat and your, you know, the furnace.
Well, that's exactly the point. So most people who lose weight have either someone says to them or they decide for themselves that they want to get down to a certain weight. Like if they're, and everybody's weight fluctuates. So let's just say your average weight or medium weight or whatever is like, 200 pounds, and you think, someone says you should really be at like 175, right? So losing 25 pounds, I'm not saying it's not, you can just do that easily, but you can do it. The question then becomes, okay, you've gotten down to 175 pounds.
Mhm.
The problem is, even just maintaining what you have been doing to get down to 175 pounds won't keep you at 175 pounds.
Yeah.
You need to, that's where
I get
the
game
analogy
has
to
the game has changed
the
when you're
Yeah.
down there. Yeah.
yeah, because your body responds to that by saying, oh, you're taking less in, we're going to make you store more. So that if you take that same amount in, so that's where you're on this treadmill. So that is where the drug hopefully is the thing that prevents or mitigates that from happening.
Beth,
That's
you had a
hopefully
question.
and I mean, I'm not saying Ozempic isn't going to work, or we just don't know for sure if it's going to work, and it's going to work for everybody. Is it going to work for 80% of the people? Is it going to work for 75% of the people? We just don't know enough now to make any definitive long-term predictions.
So, Shelley, is it correct that the people who have the higher score are then they lose the weight and then they gain the weight, they might gain more weight, but people who have a low score could go from 200 pounds to 175 and maintain eating healthy and exercising, like, but not crazy, and stay that way? Like, so if I have a higher score, I'm gonna have gym scenario. If I have a lower score, then I'm gonna have an easier time keeping myself at my new weight or close to it.
I don't know that they didn't do the lifestyle intervention studies long enough. They're still going on to know to have the outcomes that far out to say. And the weight loss was moderate across even the highest risk score. So even if the higher risk where you think there would be an effect, the lower risk was even less of an impact. The lower polygenic risk score was even less of an impact. In theory, you would think that could be the case because they're not also fighting that genetic engine that's in them.
Mhm.
But that's the area that needs a lot more work.
And then
I just want to agree
Jim,
with
Jim,
Shelley.
Jim,
Go
can
ahead.
I
Go ahead.
please have the floor for a second?
Yes.
So the other thing I was wondering is when they do these tests, these studies, so then what is the point of it in the sense, like we know people did gastric bypass surgery and then slowly gained the weight back. I know somebody who had the surgery twice. They was told to lose weight before they could get a knee replacement. So is the idea that they can now score people who and have the higher score then could see if the drugs work better? Because putting them on unless you lock them up and like have a nutritionist and a trainer and everything else, it sounds like they're just going to gain the weight back one way or the other.
That's the hard part with this, with all of the polygenic risk score, particularly when it comes to obesity, when there are so many other variables like diet and exercise that impact the risk. The person has to take ownership of those changes, and the clinician, the doctor, has to keep hounding them. But the generalized thinking is, if people truly know that they're at increased risk and know early, they might modify their behavior. They might, but versus living in bliss, ignorance of not knowing that. Now, that's a huge generalization, and the vast majority of people are lazy and aren't going to do that, myself included. But that's kind of the general. And then maybe, Beth, down the road, we will have interventions that are less costly than Ozempic, or that we have known things, Or somebody who has a life-threatening disease because of their weight might take it more seriously. Like, okay, you can blame a little bit on genetics, but don't throw in the towel just because of that. There are other things that you can do to modify that. Peggy, you have a question.
I have two comments or questions. First, I hope I don't forget the second one, is in the beginning of the article, it talked about identical twins. So they have the same genetic makeup and they would normally have the same body habitus based on just their genes. And I wondered if anybody knows any identical twins that don't have the same body habitus. Don't answer. Second question is, when you're talking about knowing that you're at risk, and so maybe you would do something to help yourself, it is like what you talked about with the breast cancer, for example. And if somebody knows they have that gene, we probably all know maybe a couple people who have prophylactic mastectomies because of their genetic risk for breast cancer. So why is there that level of importance around breast cancer? So remove your breasts because you have the gene and multiple people in your family had breast cancer, versus obese. You have the gene for being obese, but it's on you. You lose weight, you do the work. I don't know. It seems like
So it's not the difference is it's not a gene. It's a collection of risk factors
okay.
that are a little fuzzier for people to get their heads around, even clinicians. And that's why it's going to take a while for us to have clinical utility studies around. It's a great question, Peg, and it's a reason why we can't get polygenic risk scores for breast cancer in guidelines, because there's a huge amount of research that's been validated in this area. So the challenge with the breast cancer analogy is you can point to a gene or two or a handful of 11 breast cancer genes that increase your risk, and they're solid genetic risks with 87% lifetime risk of breast cancer. That's staggering, and we have known interventions that are proven. Whereas with obesity, to Jim's point earlier, yeah, it's lifestyle, yeah, it's this, you could do that, but you could potentially you pull it back, you put the weight back on. It's not as concrete. I know that's not quite the right word. I hear what you're saying, but it's not quite the same.
Well, I mean,
So
it's simple.
my other question is like, sorry,
No, go ahead.
John, but so are you, like, I don't know anything about those prophylactic mastectomies, but are those covered by insurance if you have those genes?
Yes.
So that's interesting too to me, actually.
Yep. So it's an oophorectomy if you have a risk for the ovarian cancer as a part of that. Yep. Jim.
So I think that, to follow up on that, I think that, first of all, another variable in this is when people start to get fat, because it happens at different points. Some people don't, some people are getting fat early, and some people getting fat later, and some people getting fat even later. So there's other factors that play into that as well. But for example, if Ozempic, or probably the successor, more effective drug than Ozempic that comes down the road, you could then say, for example, somebody who is maybe 18 but hasn't yet exhibited any weight problem, but has these risk factors, could go on this drug then, even though they haven't yet had any problem. Now, the other thing is, I don't think, as much as I would love to say this was going to happen, but I don't think it's going to happen. I don't think we're ever going to have a drug that's going to suppress the risk factors that you can then say, okay, I can go out and eat 5 steaks for dinner every night and I won't gain any weight. I don't think it's ever going to get to be that point. But so you're always still going to have to worry about watching your weight and eating a sensible diet and all that jazz.
Yeah,
But
and then In this
Go
paper,
ahead.
Jim, to your point, the polygenic risk score didn't really add any value from age birth to at age 3 to 5 years old. Like the regular risk factors are what predicted BMI the best, and then it kind of contributed a little bit when at 8 and 11 and 15, and it kind of plateaued. But after puberty, the polygenic risk variables added. It was more additive to the prediction of the risk of obesity. So to your point, that age, there's an influence, which is one of the author's conclusions. If you consider interventions at an earlier age, the risk for obesity, would go down if knowing they have a polygenic score that's high.
And I would also just intersect here that however effective these interventions are, we have to be, people of the future, have to be very careful about how those things are posited to young people, because you already have a significant problem, particularly among young women, of concerns about body image creating its own serious medical issues. So you have to be careful as these interventions come. And I'm not saying they shouldn't do them, but we just have to be very careful about that, because we don't want to at the same time exacerbate these body image issues that have created such problems. And, we have to be, that is why it's, this may seem very obvious, but I don't think people get this. We have to be very careful between distinguishing discussion of how people look from being healthy, because there are people who are bigger and way more, and they may be reasonably very healthy. And so health isn't just totally a matter of weight. I mean, that's a factor, but the emphasis on how people look is definitely the wrong image to get, especially for younger people who are very susceptible to concerns about that. And it obviously creates its own serious problems.
John, did you have something you
Yeah,
wanted to
I had a
ask
question
or
for you,
say?
Shelley. So this are all. I guess I'm wondering about these SNP studies generally, because you're distinguishing them from, like, I guess, studies just about genes. In my head, at least, that's a distinction you made early on. So do all the SNPs studies, by their nature, like, calculate risk in this way, like where they're not like a gene where it's on or off? It's more like it's all risk, or is that just
Right.
the fat SNPs study?
Nope. So genome-wide association studies are where the researchers evaluate these SNPs. So they pull out the SNPs that are associated, if you're looking at obesity, that are highly associated with obesity, or breast cancer, or depression. So they're looking at a collection of SNPs, a large collection, and then they put those into a mathematical formula that I can't describe to you. That comes up with a polygenic risk score. And then you'll see all these curves. So the people that have the highest polygenic risk score, then the medium, and then then you see these curves, S curves. But that is how they pull the SNPs from these genome-wide association studies. So you look at a certain collection of SNPs related to the condition you're exploring.
So there's
Does that answer your
never, when
question?
you're doing a study of genes, is it that they would not do that? Like, if do they ever do studies of, like, multiple genes and do a risk score based on the multiple genes? Or is that just am I making a distinction without a difference? Is that
So yeah, so that the way to think of this is that word poly. So polygenic. So it's a bunch of different genetic markers. Okay, not genes. BRCA1 is considered a monogenetic condition. So a single gene, BRCA1, BRCA2. Now you can have lots of genes, and I mentioned there's 11 well-known monogenic that increase the risk for breast cancer, but they're not all gamished together like you would with polygenic. Now this gets confusing. There are genetic tests that have all of those genes on the panel if you want to look for someone's risk for breast cancer, but you're looking at each of them individually, and each of them individually confer their own risk for breast cancer. Whereas you need this right collection of SNPs that predicts the risk. And if you don't have that right collection, then the SNPs don't work. The polygenic risk score is impactful.
So
does that make sense?
I would also say that if you can't be like Shelley, who actually knows what she's talking about when she discusses this stuff, but want to be someone who pretends they know that they're talking about, like me, I would recommend reading a really terrific book called The Gene by Siddhartha Mukherjee. He's also the person who authored the Emperor of All Maladies, a really terrific book about cancer, because he discusses very much in layperson terms a lot of these things that Shelley has talked about. And that's a lot of how I know what I know, the limited amount I know, not anywhere close to what Shelley knows, but at least I have
both great books.
Basis.
And he's a physician, and he really
and also
breaks
a researcher as well as a physician,
yes.
not just
Yep, he breaks it down.
So I recommend
Peggy.
that book if you're interested.
Peggy.
Yeah, I think I know the answer to this because people on this podcast are smart and whatever, but do we really want to know all this stuff? I kind of don't. Like,
Peggy,
I just don't.
We didn't answer your first. You had 2 questions, and I don't think we answered the twin one. Or nobody commented
really
on the
want to
twin one.
know about your oh God.
Well,
just
Peg, maybe we don't want to know, but maybe our children want to know, or our children's children.
No, but why?
Because if you can intervene and you can live a better, more whole, long life,
they're going to be obsessed their whole life with, oh my God, I have the fat gene. I'm going to be fat. I can't have that dessert. And
I can tell you
horrible.
that this younger generation that are coming in and talking to the labs, they want more information. More is better, whether they act on it or not. They are actively seeking this out.
They think they want it, but do they want it? Everybody's unhappy. Everybody
no, this is fair.
So you think people aren't happy because they know too much? They'd be happier if they were dumb.
No, this is fair. Exactly. This is fair, and this is I've said this on this podcast before with you guys. I'll repeat it again, which is when I was younger. If we had this conversation 20 years ago, I would have had a visceral reaction to this conversation about genes and about biology being destiny and about gayness being destiny or being identifiable in a gene that perhaps one could eliminate or one could control. That's very high on my paranoia list, and that's akin to what Peggy's talking about. I mean, she's do we want to know? That is, I mean, some people are going to go and take that gene out of their kids.
Sexuality is a good example, John. Maybe even a better example than weight. It is a complex matter. Is there a genetic component? Almost certainly, but it's not a gene, a gay gene or a non-gay gene. There is probably a genetic component. But are they going to come up
with a risk factor of it? I mean, that's where I can see where Peggy's
but I mean, it's also an environmental issue. Behavior is also influenced by environmental factors.
I think also the point is for those that want to know and have the means to find out, there's the option of knowing. And if you don't want to know, it should never be forced upon you to know. If that's
but it's not forced upon you, but with everything, it's a societal thing. Like, what's wrong with you that you don't want to know and you don't want to better yourself?
You say that, but every state has mandatory genetic testing when a child is born for certain conditions that are prevalent, and that's not.
Right.
That's
not an option
unless you don't go to a doctor, which is what people are doing more and more because they don't want that. No, they don't take their kid to a doctor because they don't
some
want
people aren't born in the hospital, Shelley.
Yes.
Well, if they're not born in a hospital, yeah.
Right. No, there are a lot of people going that route because
let's
they
say
don't want
a lot.
all that.
I don't know what a lot means, but I mean, look, there's obviously some. I totally get what you're saying, Peggy. I mean, I personally would always want to know, but not everybody feels that way, and that's fine. I do think, though, that there's a difference between children and when you get to be an adult and having the option of having this information and being able to make informed choices. Maybe you don't want to know when you're 18, but some people, I think a lot of people would want to know and be able to make informed choices.
Even with the breast cancer susceptibility genes that I mentioned earlier, we mentioned repeatedly, we don't test children for that. We have to be over 18 because, first of all, it doesn't occur at a young age. So you're not going to intervene. You're not going to do anything. There are exceptions to that where people have had their 16-year-old tested, but if you can't intervene or have the option of doing it, then my question always when I saw patients was, why do it? If you don't think you're going to do anything differently, then why take the test at all?
Yeah, I had that experience with that ALS
Mhm.
patient I took care of for years, and she had the genetic variant of it, and her kids all got tested, and they didn't want to know their results until after they had kids because they wanted to have kids and they didn't want to know
That burden. Yeah.
that burden.
Wow.
Yeah. So they all got tested because they wanted to know eventually because they could do what their mom did, which was plan ahead and do all sorts of prophylactic things like get a trach and get a G tube and get everything set up and live longer
Wow.
because
And-
she was prepared, but they still wanted
That's
kids.
great.
And
So
some
they-
people would do a different route. Once they would get to the age when they were going to have kids, they would learn it, and then they would do
And not have
alternative,
kids.
Yeah. Have IVF, and
Oh.
and not have
Yeah.
the gene,
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
embryo that planted with genes. So, which is
right.
expensive. I'm not saying that everybody can do that, but
Right. But man,
everybody has a choice of, yeah.
I mean, but knowledge gives you options, right? To make different choices.
It also
and-
depends
it
on your
depends.
personality, on how you can handle it too.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And
Well, it
your
totally depends. Like my
economics.
stepmom's family, they have a big history of Alzheimer's. There's now a test. I don't know if it's 100%, but it can tell you if you have a stronger chance of getting Alzheimer's. Why in the world would she's 77, my stepmom. What is getting the test going to do?
right.
Why get the test?
Right. I mean, if you got it, like let's say she was your bio mom and you
Right.
got it now, I mean, you're a bad example because you travel constantly. But if I got it and I was like, oh my God, I'm going to do that whole thing that everybody says, do it now, travel now, live your life to the fullest now. And then you blow all your money because all you do is have a bunch of fun and then you never get Alzheimer's. It's like so messed up.
So the downside would be of
You
that
had a lot of
example would
fun
be
and
you
you
would have had
don't
a
have
great
Alzheimer's.
time and not get Alzheimer's. That doesn't sound like a bad result to me.
But there are drugs now, not the 77-year-old, but there are drugs that you can take to reduce some of the.
I'd want to know if I'm going to get Alzheimer's or if I have a greater risk of getting it. Even if I'm 77, I'd want to know.
Yeah.
I want to know everything
Why,
as
though?
soon as I
I
can
want to
know
know
it
stuff
as much
now.
as I can.
I'm ready to know stuff because I'm more like Jim. I want to know. And why do I want
You
to know?
can't
Because
do
I want
anything
to
about
plan
it.
for it. I want to plan for
Yeah,
a demise. I want to
agree.
plan
Some
for
people
going
just want
down
to know,
fast and easy.
even if.
And then when you
Yeah.
have Alzheimer's, you're not going to know you have Alzheimer's.
I mean,
you have Alzheimer's.
Yeah, but you can
I-
plan for it, I would think.
Let me go a step further in this. I'm on the school that I would rather know that I have some disease that I'm going to die of than just, people say, oh, I just like to go in my sleep. I don't want to go. Well, first of all, I don't want to go at all, but I don't want to go in my sleep. I would rather know because I would rather,
Yes.
maybe be able to say goodbye to some people.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, like what?
Have-
You're going to
have
say goodbye
options.
now? You get the
Well,
test? And
no,
then
no,
you're gonna
no.
get
I'm-
Alzheimer's, so
I'm
you
just-
start saying goodbye.
No,
to
but
people,
suppose
'cause you
I
never
got
know
a
when it's gonna
diagnosis that I
strike.
had,
It could
pancreatic
strike tomorrow.
cancer.
It could strike
I would
tomorrow,
have like,
Jim.
maybe 6 months or a year or something. I would rather have that 6 months or a year to be able to say goodbye to people.
Well, this
I
has
don't-
been a
that's
lovely
just my
conversation.
opinion.
I don't think knowing if you have the gene for Alzheimer's is going to make you say goodbye faster. You're gonna.
No, but it might make me make more
You might be
put
Different
into
life
place
decisions.
more things or something. Maybe more
Or maybe
concerned
take
about
that trip to Australia.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Stop working. Do things that are meaningful now.
it. Stop
to you,
working,
like
yes, and just pick
why
money
you
off the money tree.
why you
I can
can
just tell
remember
people
them.
that I didn't pay my bills because I forgot. I have
I feel like this position
Built-in
Peggy's
excuse.
taking, which I don't necessarily disagree with entirely, is
It's
is
sort
a
of an extreme
recent
position.
phenomenon, and I understand where it's coming. Like, there's this idea that like I don't want to know about all things, about like just I think that's a product of an information age where we're pummeled with endless information and we have everything, and we're literally at the point now where we're like, enough. I've had enough.
Do you know that John I don't disagree with your main point, but I'll just give you a sort of a counter to that, which is up until basically the middle of the 20th century, it was quite common, at least in the United States, for patients who had a fatal illness, for the doctors not to tell the patients that they had a fatal illness.
I've seen
That's crazy to me.
Yeah.
They would tell their loved one.
I think that's in episode 1, season
patient.
1 of The Crown. I think they didn't tell the king. They didn't tell the king.
I'm just saying.
They were like, they kept alluding to it, but
that
they
is
never
crazy
actually told the king of England. They didn't tell him.
If the king says, I don't want to know, that's one thing. But I mean, to just withhold it from them.
They withheld it. The doctors like withholding it, yeah.
So what's the point?
Well, did they withhold Biden's prostate PSA from him?
I think that I think they told Biden and he forgot.
I mean, John was obsessed with death for the longest time, and maybe, I don't know if he still is because I don't hang out with him anymore, but...
Oh, taking a shot there.
Obsessed with death. I mean...
No, I'm not.
No.
But
I don't want to die. I never want to die.
You have more fun living when you're aware you're going to die.
You were like sure you were going to be dead so early.
Well, based on John's former lifestyle, I would say that wasn't a completely
that was a fair bet.
Yeah, it wasn't a completely, crazy.
No. Well, it was about your dad because your dad had a heart attack. So you were like, I'm going to die young.
Yeah, we all thought that. All my siblings, we all thought that.
Mm-hmm. And that happens, and that's grief, and it's got, it's various other things. And
well, don't this always affect when I see an obituary where somebody is younger than me? That always is like, whoa.
Like you feel good about that? You're like, yes.
No, I feel like, oh my God, I'm on borrowed time.
I made it.
Borrowed time now.
All right, let's close out. This was a lot of fun, Jim.
I've already overdrawn my time at the time.
For everybody. I want to thank everybody for listening. This was
wow, that's an abrupt end.
I'm going to make it an abrupt end. Shelley has to go to bed.
I would rather have time to say goodbye to people, John.
Yes, you have time. We'll do an addendum.
Put it in
you
the
can
chat.
put it in the notes, the show notes. Jim's going to say goodbye.
I just want to point out.
Show notes.
I just want to point out that my main goal is to live long enough so that the lost episode of the podcast will be published.
It's great. It's coming. It's coming. It's right around the corner. It's coming up soon.
Yes, just like prosperity.
We want to thank you all for listening. If you have a chance, go on to Blue Sky and comment on the show, or on Apple Podcasts, or on Spotify, or wherever you're listening to us. We're still on our website, insearchofanargument.com, and but the best thing you can do if you like the podcast, we've said it before, we'll say it again, is you can share this with someone else. Please
send us some topic ideas for future podcast episodes, because if you send one, we will do it because we're that desperate.
Peggy's whispering. Whispering doesn't work.
Peggy doesn't want anyone to know. Peggy Bennett, who lives at, what's her address? We'll put it out so everybody knows it's the Peggy Bennett, who doesn't want any of her friends or relatives to know she does a podcast.
I think we should invest in a billboard in Grand Rapids.
Yeah, absolutely.
In search of an argument.
A billboard and a sound truck,
Peggy's picture.
Listen to Peggy Bennett on the podcast.
I may actually do that. That's not a whole other thing. All right, everybody. Thanks for listening.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.